right, so the other day we talked about multicellularity, okay? What do you have to have if you are truly multicellular? Specialization, okay? And specialization basically means that there is division of labor within the organism. That is that some cells in the organism do a certain job and other cells in the organism do another job, okay? So they are different, okay? Slightly different, at least in their structure, in order to make that happen, all right? So what we're going to look at today is transport within multicellular organisms. Plants in particular, because next week we're going to do our plant transport lab where I will probably go up and buy a couple more plants and we will chop them up and put them in graduated cylinders and monitor how quickly they transport water and where precisely it goes within the plants. Okay, probably something you didn't do so much with the celery experiment when you were in the 5th grade. Okay, we will actually be looking at where does the dye in fact end up, because we've looked at the layers of the leaf and we know what the structures in those layers are about. Okay? So, key points for today: understand how transport within cells, okay, in particular osmosis, okay, is similar and involved in transport in a multicellular organism. Okay, we're also going to look back a little bit on the polar nature of water stuff that we talked about back in chemistry, because that's involved as well. Okay, understand how nutrients, water, sugar, and minerals are transported in vascular plants. Look at the structure of vascular plants very simply, okay, like roots and stem and phloem and xylem and that kind of stuff. We're not getting like super complex. And learn what forces are involved in the transport of water and sugar, okay, for plants. Okay, so terrestrial plants, and that's of course what we're dealing with, have a fairly major challenge. The resources they require are spatially separated. That means they're not in the same place. Water and nutrients are in the dirt. In the dirt there is no light, and plants also need that. So they have to have specialized structures that allow them to acquire both of those things and transport the stuff they get from those places, okay, to the places that can't acquire them. So in other words, roots can't carry out photosynthesis because they're underground where it's dark. Okay? And leaves can't absorb water because they're covered in a waxy cuticle that prevents evaporation. Okay? So plants will use the leaves, obviously, to carry out photosynthesis, and they will transport the sugars down to the roots. Okay? And the roots will absorb water and nutrients and transport them up, okay, to the leaves where they are required. Everyone follow so far? Okay. So you got some materials going up the plant, some materials going down the plant. Do you need two sets of pipes? Yeah. Definitely. Okay, so we're also looking at only vascular plants. Okay, vascular means tubes. Okay, so that's why your cardiovascular system is named that way. Okay, it is the system of tubes that run through your body and carry blood. Okay, vascular plants have tubes that carry water and sugar. Right? And obviously, since those two things go in different directions, we need different tubes for both. Otherwise, it's like having a northbound train and a southbound train on the same track. Okay? It's not going to end well. So plants have come up with a lot of adaptations to these issues of having their resources in different places. Okay? One of the solutions is what strawberries do. Also, raspberries do this. Okay? They will suddenly pop up elsewhere. Okay? They'll be like the first plant and it's growing, you know, over here, and then all of a sudden, like 5 feet away, up pops another one. Okay? It's not necessarily because a seed fell there and that plant germinated. If you pull the other plant, sometimes the thing connecting them is strong enough that you can actually pull the connecting stolon, is what it's called, all the way up and see that it's connected to the first plant. Okay? So this is what some plants do if one part of the plant is beginning to exhaust the resources in its area. Okay? What it'll essentially do is run a pipeline over to another area where there isn't something growing already. And another part of the plant will grow there, and nutrients can be transported back to the original plant through the stolon. Okay? Strawberries and raspberries are the most common examples of this, but anything that kind of crawls, okay, lilacs are another one. Okay? They kind of just come up everywhere. Those kind of plants usually use stolons as a means of survival. Okay? Some plants, okay, will store their energy that they make, if they make more than they need, so that in a following year, they can grow in the same place. Because if they were able to get mature and make lots of energy in that area, it was obviously good for them. Okay? So they'll make either a rhizome, okay, or they'll make a tuber. Okay? Tubers are like potatoes. Okay? Rhizomes are more like kind of swollen roots. Okay? Not that a tuber isn't a swollen root, but okay, they're a little bit different in their structure.
So it's like a carrot?
No, a carrot is, it's kind of in the middle. Trying to think, hops make rhizomes. What else?
Ginger?
Cassava is a rhizome. Okay, like starchy, it's very similar, right? But the rhizome is going to tend to be a bit sweeter, simply because it's storing it more as like sugars as opposed to starches. Like starch is bitter, right? If you just bite into a potato, okay, it's not sweet.
Yeah, so it's like a yam or rhizome?
Yeah, yam would be, well, yam is kind of a tuber as well. It is sweeter, but yeah, they're very similar basically. There's some little thing that separates the two that I can't remember. Okay? They essentially serve the same purpose though. Okay? They store a whole bunch of energy. And then the next year, the plant can grow using that energy. And this is in fact how you seed potatoes. Okay? I mean, you've all seen The Martian, right? When Mark Watney wanted to grow the potatoes, he just cut them in half and put them in the poop dirt mixture, okay, that he made, okay? And then they grew from there. That's exactly how you seed potatoes. Okay? There's enough energy stored in the potato, and as long as there's an eye on those potatoes, that is a place where roots can grow from. Okay, so there's so much energy stored in that potato that it can at least get a bit of a root and a bit of a stalk above ground, where that stalk can then start carrying out photosynthesis. Then it doesn't need the energy from the potato anymore, and it can start carrying out photosynthesis, grow into a big plant, and make its own potatoes, okay, to grow from for the next year. All right. This is why, of course, potatoes are such a high-calorie food. Okay? A tuber full of starch, that's essentially plant fat. Okay? If we have excess energy, we store it as fat. That's what animals do, right? We store it as glycogen and fat. Okay? Whereas plants will store it as starch, okay? Or as sugars, if you're looking at an onion. Okay? An onion also has a swollen root, okay? But they're very sweet. They store a lot of sugar in that root. All right, so those are just some examples, okay, of some survival tactics that plants will use when they're trying to keep the resources that they have built or acquire the resources that they need, okay, in order to survive. Okay, and you can see that's strawberries there. Okay. All right, questions on that so far? Okay, so the big thing here is this is kind of that specialization thing. The plant's got to have parts that do photosynthesis, parts that acquire water and nutrients, parts that can store energy, and the one thing we haven't talked about yet, transport between the two. Okay, it's kind of the big point of this whole lesson. Okay, so vascular plants. They live on land. Okay, there are no aquatic vascular plants. Okay. They live on land, and they have to be able to survive periods of drought. Okay? Even if they're just short periods, but they have to be able to survive that. And because they're surrounded by air and not water, they have to worry about evaporation. Okay? So, okay, plants need to have that waxy cuticle that we talked about, but they also need to become fairly strong. Right? If you look at the plants I have at the front of the room here, okay, those plants have little to none of this material. Okay, lignin is it's like a protein that acts like cement. Okay, so if you've got two plant cells next to each other, okay, they can support a bit of weight with their water vacuoles and their cell walls, right? Those plants are examples of plants that just use turgor pressure and cell walls to support themselves. How tall are those plants?
Short.
Right. Okay. They're not ever going to get very tall because they can't support that weight. Okay. In fact, they mostly grow laterally. Okay. And once they get kind of to a certain height, they just kind of fall over. And you can see this one here, right? It's just growing downwards. Okay. So they can only tolerate so much weight. Okay. But that means then that if you can't get very tall, as a plant, you could get shaded. Agreed? As a plant, you don't want to be shaded. Okay? There's this thing called competition. okay, between organisms. And plants do it. It seems weird to think of plants competing, but they do. Okay? They compete for survival, light, water. Okay? If you get tall, you are going to outcompete things that are short. Okay? To get tall, though, you have to be able to support your weight. That's what lignin is for. Lignin cements the cell walls together and essentially makes wood. Okay? That's where wood comes from. It's this lignin cementing cell walls together, making them no longer flexible, but inflexible and hard. Okay? That means that that plant, which is now basically a tree, okay, can get really, really tall because wood is very strong. Okay? Everyone kind of follow me there? Okay, so lignin is a good adaptation for creating hard structures within the plant that can be used for support. They can also be used to protect seeds. Okay? The same thing is used on nuts. Okay? You get that hard shell, okay, around that. It's got a lot of lignin in it. Okay? Pine cones, right? A lot of lignin. They're quite, not spruce cones, but pine cones are quite woody. Okay? Spruce cones are more like paper. Still the same material, but not as strong. Okay? So lignin is a structural adaptation, okay, or an evolutionary adaptation that allows plants to get larger. Okay? Without it, they look more like this. Okay? And much, much smaller. Okay, now here's kind of how that works. Okay, so lignin cements those cellulose fibers that the cell frame, cell wall is made out of, cements them together, makes them stronger. Okay.
What's the hemicellulose?
It's just a sugar that's part of the matrix that makes up the cell wall. So there's cellulose and there's hemicellulose. One is like curly chain and the other is straighter. Okay, turgor pressure. I found the pictures of my sick plants. Pre-COVID sick plants. Okay. So turgor pressure is that pressure of the water vacuoles pushing against the cell wall, because as we said, turgor pressure and the cell wall can't do this job on their own. Both have to work in concert with each other. Right? So this plant here was hadn't been watered for a really, really long time. Okay? A bigger view of it, everything is all like limp and weak. Okay? So the water vacuoles in this plant here looked like this situation here. Okay? Because the water vacuoles aren't pushing, the cytoplasm pulls away from the cell wall. Okay? And it can actually almost cause it to cave in. It actually almost reverses what it's supposed to do and pulls the wall inward, okay? Making it weak, okay? And unable to support itself. When the vacuole is full, everything gets pushed against the cell wall, okay? Making that cell wall harder. Okay? Everybody all right with that? If you don't have that, then the plant wilts, okay? Which you can kind of see in this picture here on the right. Okay, you can see that all the water vacuoles there, okay, are full at the top. Plant is able to support itself. As they lower, okay, plant weakens. Now, what causes the water vacuoles to empty?
Dehydration.
Okay, so that's what happens when they're dehydrated. When they're dehydrated, they're losing water. What stays behind when the water evaporates? Salt. Okay, salt stays behind and causes what cell transport process to occur?
Osmosis.
Yeah, and osmosis will start to pull the water out, okay, of those vacuoles, okay, and they'll start to shrink. Okay. All right, and then you guys saw the video of the recovery, okay, of that plant there before. All right, so roots, okay. So going over parts of the plant here. Roots. Roots anchor the plant, okay, and they absorb minerals, water, okay, conduct water and nutrients, okay, all of that kind of stuff. And they can be modified to store food, like the rhizome and the tuber and things like that. Okay, now roots come in a few different kinds. Okay, we're going to be mostly focused on these two types because the other two are kind of hybrids. Okay, so taproots. If something has a taproot, it has a single root that goes down generally pretty deep. Okay, and there might be small roots that come off. The best example of that is a carrot, because you've all seen what a carrot looks like, okay, or a parsnip. Canada thistle also does this. Okay, it's actually what makes it so hard to kill. If you just pull a Canada thistle, wear gloves. Okay, but if you just pull it out and you leave any bit of that root in the ground, it'll grow back. Okay? It's really insidious that way. And sometimes those taproots can go down 4 feet or more, okay, on a mature Canada thistle. And I mean, sometimes, you know, Canada thistle can be higher than your waist when it's totally mature. Okay? It can go really deep. Dandelion, same thing. If you ever yanked out a dandelion, they got a single long taproot. Okay? The other type of root is fibrous roots. Your grass has fibrous roots. Okay? What do you suppose like a spruce tree or a poplar tree, something big and tall, what do you suppose they have, tap or fibrous? Fibrous. Yeah, if you've ever seen one uprooted, okay, they have a whole bunch of roots that go everywhere. It's why you can trip over them if you're hiking, right? They go everywhere. They're not one single deep root. If you're a tall tree, you don't want to have a taproot. Because in the wind, what's that? Yeah, you can tip over, but also in the wind, if the top of the tree starts to do this and you only have one single root, okay, you've got a pivot point at ground level. Top of the tree starts to do this, bottom of the tree will wiggle, 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 and eventually it'll just pop. It'll just go over. Okay? It's much harder to tip over a tree that's got a bunch of roots everywhere holding on in all directions. Okay? So typically large trees have a fibrous root system. Okay? Grass has a fibrous root system. That's why those are things that are really good for preventing erosion. Okay? If you've ever seen what happens like on a bare lot, on a vacant lot, the wind comes up and then everything just blows away, it's because there's nothing there to hold the dirt down. If you have a bunch of things with fibrous roots, they'll hold the dirt down and prevent erosion. They'll even prevent erosion from water generally because they'll hold the soil in place even if there's like a bit of a flood going on. Does that sort of make sense? Okay. Are there advantages to either one?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean there's certain advantages. Obviously a taproot can store far more energy than a fibrous root can. Okay. A taproot can go generally a bit deeper. Okay. But fibrous roots have the advantage of accessing more area. Okay. What do you suppose a saguaro cactus would have? No, the ones that are on like the taco time sign?
Fibrous root.
It does have a fibrous root system. Okay. Lots of people think, oh, well, a cactus would need to have really, really deep roots because it never rains. Well, that's actually why they don't have a really, really deep root. Yeah, if it never rains, it doesn't matter how deep your root goes, it's just gonna hit rocks and dry dirt, okay? But if you've got roots that go way out in all directions, when it does rain, that water's not gonna penetrate very deep into the soil. You want all of your roots right at the surface so that they can grab it right away when it happens. So saguaro cacti actually have roots that can be up to 50 meters away from them, okay, horizontally. Okay, then we got prop roots. Okay, prop roots you'd see in a tropical rainforest.
Mangrove trees.
Yeah, mangrove trees, exactly. They're the ones that are above ground. Okay, they're kind of like a snorkel. Okay, so when the bottom roots are flooded, the tree doesn't like drown, doesn't suffocate. Okay, around here, if a tree has its roots submerged in saturated soil for too long, it'll die because no oxygen will get to the roots, and the roots won't be able to carry out cellular respiration. Okay, so trees that live in flooded conditions, like the Everglades, the tropical rainforest, and places like that, okay, they're going to have these prop roots that kind of prop them up from above, okay, keep them from tipping over, being washed away in a flood, but also allow access to oxygen, okay, when the other roots are submerged. Okay, and then you got things called adventitious roots. Okay, plants that can climb on things can put these out. Okay, so ivy. Okay, would be an example. Honeysuckle, okay, does the same thing. So have you ever seen ivy growing up the side of a building? Okay, it's got adventitious roots. And in fact, these plants here also do. I had this species of plant in my kitchen years ago. And anywhere where there's actually you can see the adventitious roots right here. Okay, these ones are dried up a little bit, but okay, any of these points here, okay, there's little nodules. You can actually see them best right here. Okay, these little brown nodules on the plant. Okay, if those come into contact with something that they can anchor on, they'll secrete kind of an acid that will work its way in and almost make a hole for the plant to put a root into. Okay, I found that out the hard way because I had them growing on top of my cupboards. And when I moved, I went up to grab my plant and I stepped back to pull it away and I pulled out a chunk of drywall because the plant had gone through the drywall and had put roots in behind it. Okay, that it had just drilled, like literally drilled through. So I always keep them, away from the
Yeah,
walls.
I have a couple of those in my room, so I have to watch them.
Yes, you do have to watch for it, because they'll eat right into the drywall, and then, yeah, it's a big repair job afterwards. Okay? So yeah, some plants will have that, but mostly ones that climb, okay, will do that. They can put their roots in kind of anywhere. Okay, so I might ask you about the different root types, or I might ask you in what situation would a taproot be advantageous, or would a fibrous root system be advantageous in this situation, okay, that kind of thing. All right, in the end, they all do pretty much the same thing. They acquire water and nutrients, and they anchor the plant to the ground. Okay, stems. The stems is the part that does transporting. Sure, they're green in a lot of plants, and if they're green, they are carrying out a little bit of photosynthesis, but it's not their primary job. They're specialized to do two things: support and transport. Okay, they have to support any foliage above, and they have to have the tubes that transport the water into sugar. Okay, so support the plant, transport nutrients from the roots to the leaves. It's also where you will find the buds, okay, for a plant. So if a plant is going to change its growth pattern, okay, that generally starts from the stem. Okay, even if it's the tip of the stem, that's where you're going to find the buds. Okay, so if I'm looking at this plant right here, so this is before and this is after. Okay, right down here, okay, are these little apical buds. Okay, and if an animal comes along and eats the top of this plant, because that happens all the time, okay, the plant needs to be able to grow back. Right, so it's got to grow back from the next point down where there are some buds. Okay, and so a little while later, this is what you see, right? The top has been taken off, but we're starting to get growth from right here. Okay? This is how you make a hedge. Okay? Has anyone ever gone to like a hedge maze or have a hedge at their house? The cemetery over by the Ford dealership, right? They've got that Carolina hedge all the way around the cemetery. Okay? The way you make a hedge like that is you prune it all the time. The more you prune it, okay? So if I cut this part off, the plant is forced to grow from further back, which makes it thicker. Okay, so the more I trim it, the thicker it will get, because it's forced to grow from further behind to make that foliage. And the more you trim it, the more you can shape it, okay, in that way. Does that sort of make sense? It's a natural reaction of plants to being eaten, but we take advantage of it to shape them and make them look nice, okay, or to make them a wall, okay, like a hedge. Right? The more we trim them, the more they will look like that. Okay? Is that a fast process? No. Okay, I had like cotoneasters is the name of the most common hedge plant, and it was like years I had these things, and I was trimming them, and it never became a hedge. Okay, it takes a very long time. Like if you plant the hedge, you're probably not going to enjoy it. Okay, the next person after you probably will. Okay, so stems also use turgor pressure, but they can also use lignin, depending on whether it is a woody plant, okay, like a tree, or whether it's a plant like those ones there that are more fleshy. All right, and then the leaves. Okay, so once again, we see this diagram of the layers of the leaf. Okay, main job of the leaf, photosynthesis. Okay, it's green, it's flat, it's exposed to the sun. Okay, so they can be arranged in a lot of different ways. Okay, leaves vary extensively in their shape. Okay, I mean, even we see that even around here, right? You've got like dandelions and thistles that have like kind of pointy leaves. Okay, you've got spruce and pine that have needles for leaves. Okay, and then you have more typical leaves like on a poplar tree or an aspen or something like that. Okay, they kind of have a more typically shaped leaf. Okay, in general, a leaf is a blade, a stalk, and where that joins the stem is called the petiole. Okay, that's the general structure of a leaf. Okay, I'm never going to ask you about those. I see you all writing that diagram down. I'm just telling you. Okay, there's that general structure. Okay, for a leaf, this is the structure of the leaf that I'm most concerned with. Okay, the layers of the leaf, okay, the different specialized cells within those layers. Okay, so we talked about this the other day. Okay, the upper and lower layers of the leaf are coated and sealed by the waxy cuticle, okay, that is secreted by the epidermal cells, either the upper epidermal cells or the lower epidermal cells. Okay, their job, only job, secrete the waxy cuticle. Okay, going from the top down, okay, the next layer in there is the palisade layer. I'm not worried about this word, mesophyll. If you say palisade layer, that's good enough. Okay, same down here with the spongy. Okay, palisade layer, spongy layer. Okay, so the palisade layer, we've got all these cells that have a very similar shape, which basically allows us to compact a whole bunch of them in there, okay, and get a lot of cells carrying out photosynthesis. Okay, so those cells are specialized to do that job. Lots of chloroplasts and things like that. And they're actually named after a rock formation that looks very similar to it. If you've ever seen the rock formations, are called palisades, and they're just like hexagonal columns of rock that are just, the mineralization process just produces these things that, okay, look very similar to that. Okay, and then the layer underneath the palisade layer is the spongy layer. Okay, so plant cells in there are still probably going to carry out a bit of photosynthesis, but that's not their primary job. Their primary job is to help with the exchange of materials that is needed for photosynthesis. Okay, so that means making sure water is going to be in these spongy areas and available to move into the palisade cells as they carry out photosynthesis, or evaporate out through the stomates. Okay. Also, so that carbon dioxide coming in through the stomates can get into these pores and move to the palisade cells that are going to need it for photosynthesis, and also so that oxygen can quickly get out. Okay, so that's kind of the exchanging materials layer, okay, and it has to be porous or spongy so that there's space for all of those materials to move in and out. Okay. Embedded in the spongy layer, you are also going to find the vascular tissue, which is usually called a veinlet if it's a small one. Okay, if it's a big one, it's a vein. Okay, they don't have capillaries, and like we have veins and capillaries, they have veins and veinlets. There's two types of vascular tissue. Okay, on the outside is the phloem, and on the inside is the xylem, which we'll talk about in a bit. You don't need to label it on that diagram. Okay, we're going to talk about it on another slide. Okay, then we go down to the lower epidermis, okay, which again secretes the cuticle, but embedded in the lower epidermis are those stomates that we talked about before. Okay, now the stomates are the things that can open and close, because a stomate is made up of two guard cells. Right? How do the stomates open and close? How do the guard cells change the shape to open and close?
Water pressure.
Opening and closing the, like draining and filling the water back to one vessel.
Right, which is what process?
Osmosis.
Osmosis. Okay, so as a plant carries out photosynthesis, water is lost. When water evaporates out through the stomate, what gets left behind? Salt. Okay, so salt concentrations can build up fairly high in the spongy layer. And that's going to result in water moving out of the guard cells and into the spongy layer, okay? And then those guard cells change shape and they close off the stomate, okay? It's, again, not a conscious decision by the plant, okay? This is just a natural reaction to water loss. Thankfully, it also leads to less water loss. Once those things are closed, they lose a lot less water, okay? All right, so this is your typical, what we call C3 leaf. That's the only one we're going to be worried about. Cacti don't have typical leaves. Okay? Their leaves have become their what? They're thorns, yeah. Okay? The thorns on a cactus are actually its leaves, but they're so modified for protection that they don't even carry out photosynthesis anymore. Okay? So the fleshy part of a cactus actually has this structure. Okay? And you see that top and bottom there are stomates, but the stomates have 4 guard cells. Okay, which allows them to seal tighter and protect more against evaporation. Thicker waxy cuticle, okay, and they arrange their palisade layer and their spongy layer in a circle around the veins, okay, limiting the amount of space where water can escape to. All right, everyone kind of follow me there? Now, if you're dying of thirst in the desert, people always have this idea, if I can find a cactus, I can just like stab it and water will come out, okay? Is that really what happens? No. Okay. Yes, you can get water from a cactus, but you have to like suck it out of the fleshy parts of the cactus.
Or just
And
eat the cactus.
well, that's, yeah, you don't want it, it's got thorns.
If you're dying of thirst, I'd rather have some thorns in my mouth than die.
Toss it for me.
Why not
Okay,
just-
so
thorns there?
you have to, it's basically, it's kind of the same texture as like honeydew or cantaloupe, like a melon, kind of like that. Not a watermelon, it's not that wet, okay, but more like a cantaloupe. And you have to suck out the water from that fleshy part, and it's not yummy. Okay, it's like actually fairly bitter, right? Reason for that, cacti don't want that to happen. They have evolved all these things to protect themselves against water loss, one of those things being other things eating them, all right? So they're modified so that they are unpleasant, okay, and prickly, you know? So yeah, they don't get eaten typically very much. Now, here in Alberta, especially in southern Alberta, we do have a particular species of cactus called the prickly pear. Okay, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, okay? It's got pretty wicked thorns, and right on the end, there's like this little hook, okay, almost like a crochet hook. And if you're not careful and you get that in you, or your dog or your pet gets it in, it's really hard. They can be broken off and they can get infected because those little hooks really grab. Unless you're an antelope. What do antelope do with prickly pear cactus?
Eat them.
Yeah. Yeah, they just chow right down on them, okay? Thorns and all. The inside of an antelope's mouth is like shoe leather, okay? Like you can just crunch right down on that and the thorns just break off, okay? So they can actually eat the prickly pear cactus. Okay, questions about the leaf? Layers. A leaf has layers. And that way it's like an ogre.
Like a
Well, an onion is a plant though, and it's not the leafy part of the plant. But yes, we can go there. It has layers. Do you need to know the layers?
Yes.
Do you need to know what each of the layers do?
Yes.
Do you need to know that that's an example of a multicellular organism with specialization? Yes. Okay? You're going to get a question on your unit exam with a picture like this that asks you to explain all of that. Okay? So make sure you're reviewing that or making a little recipe card study thing for that. Okay? Because that's a good idea actually for biology to do that. Okay? All right. Okay, transport in plants. Okay, so we got this diagram here. You have a diagram similar to this one in your notes. Okay, so these are the processes that are involved in getting water from the roots to the leaves and then getting the sugar produced by the leaves back down to the roots. Okay, so start out with step one. Okay, the roots are going to absorb water and dissolve minerals from the soil. Okay, this is an osmotic thing. Okay, they move salts around to draw water into the roots. Okay, so the water comes into the roots. Okay, and once it's in the roots, it's going to start moving up the plant. Why?
Is that cohesion?
Okay, cohesion and adhesion prevent it from falling back down, but they don't actually produce any lifting force. They just keep it from falling. Osmosis. Okay, it's these two processes in concert, the polar nature of water and osmosis, that allow water to move up a plant. So as water evaporates from here, okay, the salt gets left behind in the leaf. Water wants to move by osmosis towards that salt. Okay, so since the water is a polar molecule and is barrel a monkey, okay, hydrogen bonded to itself and to the inside of the plant, okay, it can be lifted by this osmotic pressure. Okay, and that's actually what it is. It's actually a pressure of water moving towards the salt. Okay, so that osmotic pressure lifts all these connected water molecules up the plant. Now, how big can these tubes be for that to work? Very, very small. Remember, we said hydrogen bonds are weak. Okay? They can break and reform easily, but they're not strong. Is water heavy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't have a column of water like this be supported by hydrogen bonds alone. Okay? It's way too heavy, right? Imagine, like, kind of think about this. If you've ever, like, used two different sized straws. Okay? It's really easy to draw water up a thin straw. But if you had, like, a really thick straw, or you, like, tried to suck water up through a pipe, okay, it's nearly impossible. You can't create enough suction because there's just not enough cohesion between the water for it to stay together. You've got all this unsupported water in the middle of that column that's not able to hold on to anything, and so it just falls back down. Okay, so the tubes have to be really small. In fact, they look a lot like this. Okay, this is the xylem of a plant under an electron microscope. So this is 20 micrometers. So each one of these tubes is about 10 micrometers across. Now, are they pretty densely packed? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of these inside the trunk of a tree, okay? Millions and millions and millions of them. So it's actually a fair amount of water that can be drawn up the tree, but in a whole bunch of really, really tiny tubes. Okay? As long as those tubes are tiny, then the water can hydrogen bond to the inside of it, hydrogen bond to itself and not have too big of a gap there, okay? And water can move pretty effectively. Okay, so that's all caused by transpiration, so the loss of water through the leaves, okay, creates it says force here, but it's really osmotic pressure. Okay, that pulls xylem sap upwards. The tubes that carry the water are called the xylem. Yes. Okay, so we got osmotic pressure there, okay, pulling water up the xylem. Okay, the xylem is the tubes that carry the water. Okay, and then once it gets there, the leaves are taking in carbon dioxide. They're allowing oxygen to go out. Okay, that's photosynthesis. We got light present, then we got sugars being produced. Now, the sugars have to go down to the roots. Do we need any extra special mechanism for getting sugar down to the roots? What force will do that for us for free?
Gravity.
Yeah, we just use gravity. Okay, I mean, why not? It's free and it acts downwards, it's always holding you down. Okay, gravity sucks, it's always holding you down. It's like friction, it's always such a drag. Those are awesome physics jokes, by the way. Okay, so we got sugar being just pulled down by gravity in its own set of tubes, okay, called the phloem. Right, so nothing special about how sugar goes down the plant. In the phloem, okay, the phloem has little plates in it. Okay, and in fact, xylem tubes are actually old phloem tubes. Okay, a tree grows from the outside. Right, a tree doesn't grow from the inside or a brick. Okay, a tree always grows by putting another layer on the outside every year. That's why you see rings inside a tree. Okay? So the phloem is always that outer living layer, okay, or the outer few living layers. Okay, and then everything inside of that is xylem. So way more water moving, okay, than sugar. Right? Everyone kind of follow me there? This is actually why you see in the wintertime deer will like gnaw on the bark of trees. Okay? Because there's sap in there, phloem sap, that's full of sugar that's crystallized and frozen. Well, not really frozen, but it's gotten so thick that it's no longer running and it's full of sugar. So they'll eat it, okay? Because there's no leaves or grass or anything to eat, so they'll gnaw on that. What's that?
Might be frozen without temperatures.
Because it's got so much sugar in it, the sugar actually acts like an antifreeze. So it's not flowing, but it's not icy either. It's not like a Slurpee. Okay, it's not a sappy. It's terrible.
Think of like the Sugar Shack maple syrup.
Well, it is. It's kind of like that, yeah. Okay. Be almost semi-frozen, kind of like that, yeah. Right, but not like crystallized.
So it's made of maple.
Okay, yeah, because if you get crystals in sugar, right, like in maple syrup, that's actually in tree sap, that's going to be bad because those crystals will get stuck and then the sap won't be able to go past them. So there's actually these plates in the phloem that act as ways to break up any crystals that start to form. The weight of the sap above will actually crush it against the plate and allow it to not get blocked. All right, so that sugar would then go down to the roots and the roots would carry out cellular respiration. So that's your processes right there, the diagram, how it looks. Okay, and these are the steps. So we've already talked about those, but they're in your notes. Okay, they correspond to the diagram in your notes. Okay, all right. So inside of the plant, you got the phloem, you got the xylem inside the stem. Okay, phloem is on the outside. Phloem transports sugar. Okay, xylem is on the inside. Xylem transports water. Okay, so how far into a tree does a maple syrup farmer have to punch the tap?
Not deep.
Not deep. Yeah, not at all. Okay, they're only capturing the outside layer of the tree where the maple syrup is. If they go in too deep, all they're going to get is water. Okay, because they'll be tapping the xylem and not the phloem. They want to tap the phloem where the sweet, sugary sap is. The xylem sap is just salty water.
How salty?
Not salty, not that salty. But it has minerals in it is what I mean when I say salty. Okay, all right, so the phloem is on the outside, okay, which is why, like lots of times if a tree gets damaged by something, the sap leaks out of it, the sticky sap. You very rarely see the xylem sap leak out of a tree, okay, but you often see the sugary stuff. they come out because that's the part that's on the outside. Incidentally, that's also how you can kill a tree, subtly. Okay? If you ever need to get rid of a tree for any reason, you can just ring it. Okay, like, cause some people are like, oh, I'm just gonna poison that tree, I hate that tree. Okay, people will know if you do that. But if you ring the tree, you can kill it and it's not as noticeable. So you take like a wire, so a wire saw, okay, I don't know if anyone's ever seen that, okay, and you just go all the way around the tree. And it just makes a tiny little cut into the tree. And you only have to go in about that far. What have you severed? Right, now what can't get to the roots? Right, but if you do it close to the ground or you make it nice and small, no one will ever notice, and the tree will die. Not that I know anything about doing that ever.
I did do that with a tree, and I just did it with an axe, like right at the top of the roots, and I just pushed dirt over it.
Okay, but someone might see that if they move the dirt away.
Yeah.
See, we had this nice area when I was in university where we played football sometimes, and the forestry department at the university transplanted all these big trees from somewhere into the middle of this nice area that we used to play football. And one of the guys in our dorm, he was in the forestry department. His nickname was Tree Mugger. Tree Mugger. Anyway, he said, well, we can get rid of those trees, guys. We'll just ring them. So we went out one night and we ringed all these trees with this little wire saw, okay? And the tree started to get sick. And then the forestry department came and saved them all because they figured out what we had done. Not that we had done it, but what had been done to the trees. And they made these paper mache grafts over the cuts that acted like bark. Because what's paper? It's tree, right? So they made these paper mache grafts, like a skin graft, around the tree. Yeah. That was crazy. What's that?
Just ring them again.
Yeah, well, they were a little more watchful after that. Because they went to a lot of expense to move these trees, you know. Maybe we were being selfish.
Should've done it really
Probably we were being selfish. Okay, so the outside of the tree is an important part. It's going to allow the sugars to come down. Okay, if that gets blocked or damaged, then that part of the tree might die. And sometimes you see that if there's a little notch. Sometimes you see a kind of a big area of death around that notch. Okay, because that area is no longer transporting sugars very well. Okay, so xylem, okay, transports water up the plant. Okay, that's by osmosis and the polar nature of water. Okay, that's how water moves up the xylem. So should you know those two things? Xylem, osmosis, polar nature of water, that's two things, sorry. Okay, because I might ask that on a test. How does a plant transport water and sugar? And you'd say xylem transports water up the plant by osmosis and polar nature of water, hydrogen bonds, all that stuff. Okay, I would say that's important, like this whole slide right here. Okay, so we saw this diagram back in the chemistry unit, but I found a better version of it so it's not so blurry. Okay, so you got the water going out the stomates, leaving the salts behind. Okay, you got the water molecules there that are exhibiting hydrogen bonds to the inside of the xylem, okay, or hydrogen bonds to each other. So this is adhesion, this is cohesion. Okay, that's going to bring the water up the plant. Okay, so make sure you got osmosis, adhesion, and cohesion in there. Okay, the evaporation causes that buildup of salts. Salts cause osmotic pressure. Okay, definitely want to be able to explain that. Okay, and of course in the roots, okay, it's a similar process. You got the root hairs going in there, and the water comes in. Okay. For the phloem, okay, the phloem transports the sugars that are made in the leaves back down to the roots. Okay, and so you've got the xylem and the phloem, they run counter current to each other, okay, and so the sugar is going down. If the sugar starts to get too thick, water will naturally move from the xylem to the phloem by osmosis, okay, and that'll thin the phloem sap a little bit, allow it to run a little more smoothly. Okay, now this process, does this quit when fall comes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does. Okay, once the leaves are gone, is there anything to draw water up?
No.
Because there's no more water evaporating because the leaves are gone, which also means there's no more sugar being produced. Okay, so this is important. This is the whole reason why deciduous trees lose their leaves. Okay, they don't want water to be in the middle of the tree when it freezes, because what will it do? Yeah, it'll break, right? Water expands, it'll crack the tree open. right? So they don't want to they want to lose their leaves before the temperature drops too much so that there's no water in the xylem when winter comes. The phloem we're not as worried about because, again, sugar acts like an antifreeze. Okay, that's not going to expand and break the tree. Okay, so phloem, sugar, gravity, downwards. Okay, that's what we got to know about the phloem. Phloem, sugar, down, gravity.
Oh, it's good.
All right. Sweet. All right, we got done just in time. We got 3 minutes. See if you can answer those questions. And maybe we'll go over them on Monday.